One of the things I find most interesting when two explorers get together is we sort of trade stories. This is Life's Tough, but Explorers Are Tougher. I'm your host, Richard Wiese. I love the outdoors. I always have, and I always will. I've heard stories that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Explorers are the type of people who walk in space, go to the bottom of the ocean, and stand on the highest summits. Scratch the surface of any explorer, and you'll find they're all storytellers. This show is about their tales.
This episode is brought to you by the Podcast Services Division at Life's Tough Media. Having your own podcast allows you to creatively reach all types of audiences, from clients to prospects, to your most loyal membership base. And by utilizing studio affiliates located around the world, coupled with quality remote recording capabilities, Life's Tough Media makes having a corporate podcast easier than ever before. Contact us for a no-obligation consultation at info@lifestuff.com or visit lifestuff.com to learn more.
Well, greetings to you wherever you are in the world. So I'm going to start today with a little bit of a question. When you think of a super yacht, what do you think of? Does bikinis and Speedos and champagne and caviar and just yachting through the Mediterranean come to thought? Maybe, probably the last thing that you can think of is environmental technology and all that kind of stuff. Well, today joining me is Captain Sean Meagher, and he's going to explain why your perceptions may be wrong. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
So Sean, when we think of super yachts, and first of all, what is a super yacht versus just a plain old yacht?
That's a phenomenal question, and one I get often. And to that, there's been a couple of official answers that have been posted. But I think a super yacht is anything that was like, what is Superman? I think it's something that's extraordinary. There are super yachts that are 100 feet, and there are super yachts that are 400 feet. I think it has to do with the style, the technology, and the design that goes into it. It's like, what's a supercar? I mean, you could have a Toyota, or you could have a Ferrari, and no one would argue that a Ferrari is a supercar, but the size is generally the same.
So Sean, you and I actually met through the Monaco Yacht Club, and it was, I believe, environmental awards for super yachts. And that sounds kind of like a real contradiction in terms. And so how are super yachts environmental?
Well, super yachts today, the codes that they're built to are extraordinarily stringent. Also, the places where we actually cruise are some of the most environmentally sensitive areas in the world. So in order to cruise there and cruise there safely, the boats have to be zero emissions or close to that. Plus, we have to produce any waste water that we put overboard is literally drinkable water on board. The sewage treatment plants on these boats are extraordinary. Also, we have trash collection devices, ways to recycle on board. There's some of the most stringent. They don't just meet the regulations. Often they exceed the regulations, and that's because the people that build these boats are very forward thinking.
You know, many years ago, I met Enzo Ferrari, and that was kind of cool. And he had told me that they do Formula One racing, not because it's a very cost efficient sport, but he said anytime you bring a car, in this case, to its nth degree, and that's what racing is, he goes, you learn so much about that technology that it eventually falls back down to other cars. So are there technological spin-offs that are being gleaned from the yachting world?
Absolutely. One of the more technologically advanced yachts of its time was the Maltese Falcon. It was a sailing yacht that was built by Tom Perkins. and it had he wanted a modern square rigger, and the technology that came out of that boat had a tremendous trickle down effect. I like to think of the yachting industry being as close to the space to the the space industry as you can get. You get guys like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Branson. I mean, they all have yachts, and they're all into the technology, and a lot of the same design features and in innovations that they brought to their companies, they bring into these yacht designs. And some of the yacht designers I've worked with are some of the most innovative, creative people on the planet. So the trickle down effect is immense. It reminds me of that movie, The Devil Wears Prada, when
the blue sweater,
yeah, cerulean blue sweater. The Anne Hathaway kind of chuckles when they're trying to pick out a belt for this outfit, and Meryl Streep said, this stuff is important. And so they pick out this the cerulean blue sweater that she was wearing actually came from
Eileen's basement.
Well, whatever. Probably, yeah. That's dating us back into definitely you're from Boston if you can remember Eileen's basement. But yeah, she found this cerulean blue sweater in a discount rack. But how it got there was fascinating, and it all stemmed from the people in the room picking that color and have it filtering down to that discount basement. And whether we like it or not, the technology that we use on a daily basis does come from these innovations. The cars that we drive did come from the safety features came from the racing industry. Formula One, though, may seem frivolous. The yachting industry may seem frivolous, but the technology and the creativity that those industries drive has countless trickle down effects into our daily lives, whether we know it or not.
So again, back to excuse me, my original premise of a super yacht, the perception. So again, I've met some people who are the exception, at least in my mind. But is it fair to characterize the owners of these boats in any way or shape or form? I mean, there's got to be an element of, the caviar and champagne, but you have seemed to indicate that you've seen another sort of side of it.
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of self-made men and women, and there's it's funny, people ask me, they said, what's the only thing, what do these guys have in common, what's the secret sauce? And basically the only thing that they all have in common is work ethic and a thirst for knowledge. And that doesn't stop the second they buy a boat. They don't turn off. So the typical, at least the guys that I've worked for, the typical yacht owners that I've worked for and been fortunate to work for want to see what's over that next horizon. They want to know why their vessels aren't running more efficient. And it's not because they want to pinch pennies. It's because they think, well, how can we make it run more efficient? It's just in their DNA, the questions that they ask. And they've been all grateful to be going to areas of the world that the average person doesn't get to see, and they come away from those experiences forever changed in a good way, in that they want to preserve those areas.
So I know you've taken voyages up towards the North Pole, Svalbard, which is a group of islands, technically part of Norway, but I mean, it is as far up as you can go, and still be on land. And the Northwest Passages. So those seem to be the contradiction. If you're wearing a bikini on that one or a Speedo, God bless you, because I've been up in both areas.
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate to cruise in some of the most remote areas on the planet, not just in the northern hemispheres, but around the South Pacific and other areas. But I'll stick to the Northwest Passage. that was the decision to take latitude through there was made kind of quickly, but it really best illustrates the type of attitude that these guys have. Anil Thadani is the owner of Latitude and just a wonderful human. He would never admit it, but he's put more people through school and built more houses for people and done more for anyone that I know. And he's never taken an ounce of recognition for it. So when he bought Latitude, I asked him, I said, why are you buying this boat? And if his question was, I want to sip cocktails in Saint-Tropez, I would have said, well, I know a couple of guys would be more than happy to do that for you. But he said, I want to go on adventures and photograph wildlife. And that's exactly what we did. We bought the boat and we decided that he wanted to go to Alaska. And I said, well, we were in Fort Lauderdale at the time. I said, we can go through the Panama Canal and up the coast of Mexico and California into Alaska. I said, or we can go up over the top through the Northwest Passage. And for those of you that don't know, the Northwest Passage is from the Atlantic Ocean in the Davis Strait to the Pacific Ocean through the Bering Strait. It was a path originally discovered by Roald Amundsen in the early 1900s. And when we did it to date, there had only been 215 boats that had ever accomplished that feat. But when I suggested that to him, he looked at the map and then he looked at me and said, well, that's what we have to do. And that's how fast we made the decision. And I had about 8 weeks to prepare for that trip. But that's the type of guys that these guys are. He saw that frontier. His mission was to go on adventures and photograph wildlife. And we just went ahead and did it. We figured out how to do it.
Sean, I would think there would be more downside as for a captain to go that route because, going through that area past Greenland, that's where a lot of ice flows calf off. And obviously, if an issue comes up with your ship or something, you're not that close to, your local yacht club to get repairs.
A million people will tell you how not to do something. And that's the other thing that I like about working for these guys too. It's like, nothing would get done if I saw just the paperwork going through the Panama Canal was more of a headache than ever going through an ice field. It was just dealing with the bureaucracy and the human factor is what always made me crazy in this industry. It's just the hoops that you have to jump through to get from A to B. Up there was a frontier. We relied solely on what we brought with us and the knowledge that we brought and learned along the way. And it epitomizes everything that, or how I've always tried to live my life. So to me, that was the easy choice, and it was the easy choice for Anil Thadani too. It was that was the only way to go. And when we completed it in the first time in 2014. We then moved our way down to San Francisco. And I have to admit, we were just emotionally, physically, we were burnt to a crisp. But when faced with the decision of what do we do next, I knew we had to go back. I knew we had to do it again, this time west to east. And when we did it this time, we were the third private boat in history ever to do that. We were the 9th boat in history of any type of boat ever to do that. But there really wasn't a choice. When I wrote that itinerary, I knew that was we were going to go from San Francisco to London via the Northwest Passage, and that was the only decision. And if you're an innovator and you're an explorer, those are the only choices. Is to go forward. Is to keep pushing that boundaries. It's what got us out of caves. It's what got us to the moon, and it will eventually get us to the Mars, into the stars. And that type of attitude is a wonderful thing. And that's the other thing that these voyages do and these super yachts do is they're the stuff of dreams. they give us something to strive to. They're these are vehicles of imagination, and there are people that have them and don't appreciate that, but then there are the ones that thrive on that, and that's what I think the real benefit of these boats and what this industry is doing and has the potential to do on a broader scale.
Sean, how does one become a super yacht captain? What was you didn't start on a super yacht. I have to imagine that your probably first boat might have been a Boston whaler or something like that.
Actually, my second boat was a 13-foot Boston whaler. That's a great guess. My first boat was when I was 8 years old. My mother bought me a laser and said, "Here you go." And
sailboat.
yeah, and it's probably should be thrown in jail for that these days. It was basically you gave an 8-year-old a sailboat and tell him to go sailing, which I did, and I learned how to do that in Nantucket Sound. I was also very fortunate. I attended Tabor Academy. I was on the Tabor Boy, which was a 92-foot staysail schooner, and my summer job was I worked for Highline Cruises, which were the ferry boats that ran between Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. When I was 18, I got my first captain's license, and they made me the captain. They made me the captain of a boat called the Prudence and then the Patience. The Prudence was the oldest continuous running passenger vessel in the United States at the time. She's actually running in Greenwich, Connecticut right now. Still is the Prudence. And the Patience was built in 1983 as a replica of her. And they were big, old lumbering single screw vessels. And I would do 9 dockings, 9 off the dock, 9 back on the dock every single day. And I was young enough to really have no preconceived notions about anything, really. And I was young enough not to be fearful of anything. And so I got tremendous experience doing that, running those sightseeing boats, and then eventually running the ferry boats. And I got into the super yachts. It was kind of by accident. My stepfather suggested. He said he had a good friend that was in that industry, and he said, why don't you get on the floor to see if you can get on a boat? And I did. My first boat was called Octopussy, and it was named after the James Bond movie. And at the time, it was the fastest jet boat in the world. So I spent a season in Florida and the Bahamas, and then went over to the Med on board that boat. And
now, come on, the Octopussy had to have champagne, caviar.
Oh,
this sounds
that
like
boat. Yes. Now that boat and that particular owner, he was a champagne and caviar type of guy, and it was funny. It was actually the only boat job I ever got fired from.
Well, no, that's a story unto itself. Come on. I know nobody. I don't know anybody who's actually been on the Octopussy, but I want to know why one gets fired off the Octopussy.
Well, it was interesting. I don't know. It was the captain was young and I was young, and it was too many bulls in the pen, and we had different philosophies on management skill. I'll leave it at that, but it greatly hampered my ability to be my best on board that boat. And he said to me, he says, you're going to have to leave. And I said, well, you're going to have to fire me. And so he did. And do
you have any still ashtrays or cups or anything that
I have shirts? I still have an official Octopus shirt from that. It's from that boat. But anyway, and he also said to me as I was walking out the door, he goes, I don't think this industry is for you. Maybe you should think of doing something else, which was the right thing, because if someone tells me no, that inspired me. So I left that boat. I actually took classes on management. I upgraded my license, and then the rest, as they say, is. Then I took a little sabbatical from that industry, but I went back and ran the ferry boats and honed a lot of my skills. I started a company that was completely out of the industry, but again, those skills helped me to get back in the industry, which is what I eventually did. I ran this company for 4 years, sold it, and I was sitting at my desk, and the phone rang, and it was F. Lee Bailey.
Oh my God. Okay.
And he goes, I have a client. He says, he's got this boat. Would you be interested in running it? And it was a 65-foot little Kong and Halverson in New England. And I did. And I had a great time doing it.
5 feet and little doesn't really, in my world, sort of equate. But go ahead.
So I did it. I ran that, had a good time. He then had another fleet of vessels. He had a fleet of vessels down in Florida, but he had another small explorer yacht in Thailand. And he said, do you want to go to Thailand and run this boat for me? And I said, absolutely. And I wound up going to Phuket. I arrived 10 days after the tsunami was there. And it was an interesting time in Thailand, but that's where I met a guy named Bill O'Leary and Ed Shields, who I owe both a huge debt for my career. Ran that boat in Thailand for a season, and then he came to me and said, "Do you want to run my 162-footer in the Mediterranean?" I said, "Yeah, I would." And he put me in the chair. It was funny. The insurance company wasn't going to sign off on me, and he called the insurance company and said, "So you're not going to sign off on him?" And they went, "Well, no, we'd like to see him have more experience." And he said, "Okay, well, I won't be needing your services anymore." This is Jim Irwin, the owner of that. And they went, "Well, we'll give him a chance." And that's, he got me my first ride. And for that, I'll forever be grateful. He was out of a lot of the owners that I've worked for. He was extraordinarily accessible in that I learned a tremendous amount from him, because he would be negotiating deals or doing something. And I would say, this is going back 20 years ago. I said, "Well, how would you do that?" And he would tell me and he'd show me. So when I actually got offered a better job and I used his negotiating tactics kind of like against him, it made him furious, but he was very proud of me. He told me that, after I had left and his temper died down, he was kind of like, he said, "Well, at least you learned something while you're on board this boat." From there, I went and ran a 186-foot Perini Navy, which is a sailboat called Baraska. It was a Ron Holland design. And then came back and ran a charter boat out of the U.S. after Baraska was done, and then ran a boat in the South Pacific called Blue Gold. She was a 162-foot staysail schooner for a lovely Dutch family who never showed up. And I basically played pirate running around the South Pacific on this. I did. They're like, "Here's this boat." And we were sailing around Vanuatu and New Zealand and Fiji, and hardly anyone ever on board. And they let me do some cool projects on that. They were very, we actually did a project for the Bank of Vanuatu. And this is something that you never, and this is something I'll segue into about the yachting industry. It's like, and this is stuff you'll never hear about. Anytime that there was a catastrophe in Vanuatu, we were at anchor. We had always someone monitoring Channel 16. We became the de facto Coast Guard there. We did a lot of different search and rescues that turned out positive because someone was at the switch, and we were a highly trained crew in search and rescue. I have a little bit of a background in it. I did that on the Colorado River, but when there was medical supplies that needed to go to outer islands, we would bring those medical supplies to them, or school books, or what have you. When Bank of Vanuatu asked us to do a project to literally build banks on remote islands, and I'm not talking like a big brick and mortar building, we'd put a satellite dish up in a little box in a computer so that people could open bank accounts. We did that at a tremendous discounted rate. After Hurricane Pam came through, myself and some of the other yacht owners raised money to rebuild a community center there. Firefly, which is a wonderful organization, big yacht over there, made water for the communities in the South Pacific after that particular hurricane. Latitude, when I was there on Latitude, we went and visited these islands again, bringing supplies where we could. During the latest hurricane in the Bahamas, you had Loon coordinate rescue operations out of their helicopters, are bringing in supplies. I mean, had medicine. They set up. These are the things that you don't think of when you hear about super yachts. But so these owners have the means, and we can make water. We have literally hospitals on board the boat, and when there's an emergencies, we're often in areas that other organizations can't get to, and we're usually first on the scene. That's a quick aside. But anyway, back to my story. After Blue Gold, I went on board another boat called Nuvita back in the U.S., and then left that after 3 years and got on Latitude. And Latitude was really the boat that I got to do a lot of the exploration on board, and I ran that for 5 years.
Sean, you mentioned that you were sort of on a lot of these people a fly on the wall, where you see or hear how they do business, which to me has got to be a tremendous education. There's got to be a little bit of a balancing act, because most of these individuals are accomplished or successful because of certain personality traits. So, what are some of those takeaways in terms of what you've learned, boundaries, sort of knowing how far to push before you, become a victim of their wrath? I mean, there's got to be a lot of balancing acts there.
Yeah, there is. There's a line. There's a certain amount of respect. There's I'm which has gotten me in trouble, because sometimes I don't know where the line is. I share a lot of the same personality traits that these guys share.
Yeah, well, it's great to have billionaire taste without being a billionaire, isn't it?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, again,
don't tell me they're just like you and me, because it's not true. I mean, I don't have a great deal of exposure to billionaires, but their world becomes crazy, because when you're a billionaire, everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to tell you about a deal. Everybody will laugh.
Yes. Yeah, you're 100% correct on that. And that's the one thing that I was always that, yeah, all right, that would probably be the biggest takeaway. I very rarely discussed business, or I never said, a couple times, it's interesting, because my philosophy was that these guys come on board their boats to escape, and they don't want to be inundated with business. There were some guys that I worked for that were just on all the time, and they were actually just miserable pricks. But you get them out, you get them decompressing, and then they just want to have fun. They've got tremendous amounts of responsibility that are on their shoulders. It was interesting. Anil on Latitude, probably the most. Again, I've worked with some brilliant people and brilliant minds. Anil, head and shoulders, was when he was firing all 12 cylinders. I mean, he was frightening. It was frightening to watch. But when he was just hanging out, when we were just on board the boat, taking pictures of polar bears or doing stuff, or just, we're watching Netflix in the main salon. He's a great guy to hang out with. And that's what he liked to be when he was on board that boat. He worked hard to get to that point. He would remind me constantly that he wasn't a billionaire. And we were on the top deck, and I had actually designed this table that was on the top deck, which was a really cool table. It had all different all four hemispheres of the globe, and then our voyages juxtaposed with Cook and Shackleton and Admonson carved into the table. It was a neat piece. Anyway, we're looking at this table, and a friend of his that was on board the boat is there, and we're telling him about all our adventures. And he said to Anil, he says, "Geez, Anil," he goes, I want to be you when I grow up." And Anil looked at him and with all seriousness said, he goes, "Well, you could be if you weren't such a greedy fuck."
Wow. So, and that's kind of interesting, because, I've often had very well-to-do people look at my lifestyle as an explorer and go, "Wow, I'd love to do what you're doing." And I always think to myself, you actually
can.
You actually can.
You can.
Sort of, accept things. So, Sean, what's the biggest takeaway or surprise that you had in this career?
In my career?
Yeah, biggest takeaway, biggest surprise. You know, when we're writing your obituary, and or you're writing it, so from the super yacht in the sky, you know, what was the one thing that you didn't expect when you started it, and what's the biggest life lesson you've learned from doing it?
It sounds a little bit of a cliche, but the money does not bring happiness. Um, the I've known a lot of miserable rich guys. Fortunately, I haven't worked for a lot of them. I would say that's probably one of the biggest takeaways. Also, it's a very important. Okay, this goes back to very early in my career. I worked for a guy named Joe Friedman. He owned J&R Music World. Joe was one of the funniest guys I know, and just and a nut in a good way. And he was actively involved. Like in the boat was a small 65-foot kind of go fast boat. We were in Long Island Sound. And he and I were in the engine room. I was the only crew member on board. He and I were in the engine room and we're fixing a pump. And I was getting tired, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna take a break or get something. And Joe's like, he's like, hey, he goes, I'm gonna give it one more try. Of course, he got it working. And one of the biggest takeaways that I think I learned that lesson right there and then is like, these guys never quit, ever. Until it's done. And I learned right there and then that there is a solution to everything. You just have to work hard enough to find it. And that was a cue that I've taken from all these guys, all these innovators, all these great businessmen, is that they'll put their mind onto a goal and they are relentless in achieving that goal. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a heartless individual. It just means that you never can lose sight of that. Someone asked me when I was going through the Northwest Passage and there was more ice than there had been in decades. This is did you ever worry that you weren't going to get through? And I said to them, I said, the thought never crossed my mind. It never occurred to me that we were not going to make it, ever, not once. And that's the biggest takeaway that I can see that's coming from that, is coming from this industry and coming from the people, the individuals that I've been privileged to work for, is that once you set your mind onto a goal, it's that all doubt recedes, all fear recedes. At least on the surface. I mean, you're always going to have doubts, you're always going to have fears, and you got to be smart about it. But anything is achievable, and that's my biggest takeaway, is that anything is anything is achievable.
Well, I think we'll leave it off on that. But I just want to remind you that if by chance you are cruising through the Long Island Sound and are lonely for company on that super yacht, you know, you have my phone number, Sean. You have my phone number.
You are always welcome aboard.
Okay, and I will take you up on that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Sean. Thank you so much for being a guest. Honestly, it's so easy to put certain things in a box, or a very large box in the case of super yachts, but it's a lot more nuanced than most people expect.
Tremendously so.
All right. Thank you for being a guest.
My pleasure, Richard. Talk to you soon.